Well, now a sensational Netflix documentary has cast doubt on Vince McMahon's career and legacy.
He doesn't care. He doesn't care about you. He didn't care about your family.
He put all those females in a situation where they could not say no.
They probably put their own self-respect on the back burner because ultimately that's what you want to hear from the bosses of all bosses.
As soon as I came through the curtain, he was there, and he was there to let me know just how mad he was at me.
Hey, well, look, in classic WWE fashion, it's time to introduce to the uncensored ring a surprise guest.
I called
There
you
you
out
go.
30 years
Coachman.
ago.
That's what I'm trying to tell you, is if you looked at it fairly. And
This guy's delusional.
That was a good run-in, Piers.
Vince McMahon is the dynastic powerhouse behind the biggest sports and entertainment franchise in history. World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, once a regional patchwork of modest family entertainment, is now a global juggernaut worth $6.8 billion. It merged with Dana White's UFC a year ago. Some even credit Vince McMahon and WWE with teaching a certain political heavyweight about bombastic timing and how to work a baying crowd. Well, now a sensational Netflix documentary has cast doubt on Vince McMahon's career and legacy, airing claims about ruthless practices, the steroid culture, and according to one recent lawsuit, depraved and humiliating acts. Many say he couldn't decipher himself from his pontifical on-screen personality. The question in all this, though, is a bit like the wrestling itself. Where is fact and where is fiction? A question that McMahon himself struggles to answer.
The lines of reality are very blurred in our business. The individual loses all sense of who they really are.
My name is not Vince. My name is Mr. McMahon.
Well, to debate the Ultimate Showman's ultimate legacy, we've invited some of McMahon's biggest supporters and biggest critics into the uncensored arena. Maven Huffman is a former WWE star and now YouTuber. Jonathan Coach Coachman was a WWE announcer and is now an elite sports analyst and host of Behind the Turnbuckle. Vince Russo was the head writer during the infamous Attitude Era of WWE. And Charly Arnolt, an ex-WWE backstage interviewer and now host of Outkick the Morning on Outkick.com. So welcome to all of you. A very high-powered panel for what is a very high-powered saga in many ways. Jonathan, you worked very closely with Vince McMahon for a long period of time. How accurate is this new series that's come out about him?
Well, I think it's fairly accurate, Piers, and thank you very much for having me on the show. It's great to see all the other guys and ladies that I worked with. I think it's accurate, but I think also that when you're talking to people like us who've been inside, and I spent a total of 13 years in the WWE, and also my character on camera was Vince's assistant. And I think that though the term softball came to mind, I know Vince was very upset that it was a hit piece. I didn't find that at all. I think it was fairly accurate when you talk about the time we spent on the road, the things he made us do. And I think the overriding sentiment, Piers, that came out of that was the fact that none of us, at least not with me, did I ever feel like I could say no. And I only said no one time in my entire 13 years with Vince. And when I look back on it now, that's one of the things I regret the most. But as far as accuracy, I think it was accurate, but I certainly don't think they went far enough as far as all the things that he made a lot of us do.
Okay, so what is the real Vince McMahon like? For those who don't know him, you know, in the documentary, you can see a hard-working, very committed, passionate, very successful business brain at work. You can also see a ruthless, egotistical, depraved monster who'll pretty much screw anyone, including his own family, to get what he wants. So from your perspective, Jonathan, where's the truth?
I think there's a little bit of both. I saw Vince McMahon that I would deal with it when we're shooting skits, when we're shooting a lot of things, that he was a very nice man, and he would do things very quietly to take care of a lot of guys that were getting older that couldn't make a living on their own. And you can't walk into a bank after you've been a WWE superstar and ask for a job. The other part of Vince, though, is he doesn't care. He doesn't care about you. He didn't care about your family. He didn't care about there was one time, Piers, that I was home on Christmas Eve, and I got a call to fly back to Connecticut from Kansas because Vince wanted to shoot a skit to be in the show on Monday so then he could spend time with his family. And though you talk about the regrets, that's the Vince that I think I remember the most, is as long as it was good for him and good for the company, he didn't care about the fact that if we were with our parents or with our kids or with our families. And I think you'll get that sentiment across the board. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. But certainly, as I look back, a guy that I used to respect and was incredibly loyal for, I would never be that guy today for him. No chance.
Interesting. Vince, I mean, you were one of the writers, obviously. You helped blur that line between fact and fiction. My sons were very into WWE for a few years, and I took them to a few of the events, and it was incredible entertainment. But I did have to explain to them that, you know, you realise this is not real. But then, to a degree, it was real, and that people were being thrown around. They were entertaining. It was highly choreographed. They were all well-trained, and everyone was earning good money. What seems to have unravelled since is that behind the sort of family entertainment vibe that it was generating was a lot of stuff that was certainly not conducive with family entertainment. What's your perspective on it?
Well, you know, Piers, I will tell you one thing really bothered me when I left, and to back up Coach, you know, I was the head writer during the Attitude Era. We were very successful during that time. The reason I left Vince was because I was looking to relocate my family because I was putting in so many hours. My wife was raising my kids by herself. And Vince McMahon looked me in the eye and said, Vince, I don't see what the problem is. You make enough money now, hire a nanny to raise your kids. Those were his exact words. I was on the phone with WCW the next day because I was no longer going to work for a man like that. He showed me his true colors. But when I was writing the Attitude Era, and what the Attitude Era was all about, Piers, was blue collar versus white collar. That's what it was all about. Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vince McMahon. Austin was telling McMahon every single thing a blue-collar worker would want to tell his boss. Well, when I left, all of a sudden there was a shift. And that shift was, all of a sudden, Vince is on camera with all these beautiful women, making out with them, kissing them, groping them. They're groping him. Now, Piers, you got to understand something, and everybody here will understand this. As a writer, I could have never written any of our female characters in that position because they couldn't have said no. They would have had to say yes because it was with Vince McMahon, and they would have thought if they didn't do this, they were going to be fired. So when I saw this type of behavior after I left, it never sat well with me. Now, I don't know if that came from Vince or the writers, but like I said, he put all those females in a situation where they could not say no because they may have felt like their job was on the line.
Okay, well, Charlie, you are the female of this panel. What's your view of Vince McMahon? Who is the real Vince?
So from my perspective, I didn't always get such a clear look at who Vince McMahon was. I didn't have to be in the writers' meetings like a lot of people did. I basically would show up to work, be given a script, say, this is what you're doing. And I would generally communicate with other people on the writing staff and my bosses, which mainly included Michael Cole. He was the main one. If I had an issue, I would talk to him rather than directly talking to Vince. But what I will say is that even in my position where I wasn't interacting with Vince on a regular basis, I think like everybody else, I always aspired to get validation from Vince McMahon, because when you did cross paths with him in the back of, you know, the arena or in the hallway, if he would say something to you, it would mean something, even a simple hello, because Vince a lot of times wouldn't even address you. And if he would address you, it means he either found you were doing something correctly or he liked how you were going about things. And especially when you got a good job. That was like, oh my goodness, Vince just told me good job. What did I just do that I need to now replicate each time moving forward? So I would say there was a lot of pressure there. Even though I didn't talk to him a lot, when he did speak to me, it definitely resonated. And I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I definitely think that's what happened with a lot of the people in the company, and especially these people that were put in situations that were maybe more uncomfortable than others. If they were getting this validation from Vince in those situations, they probably put their own self-respect on the back burner, because ultimately that's what you want to hear from the bosses of all bosses at WWE.
I mean, it was a very sort of high testosterone environment, wasn't it? Very macho. In your time there, did you feel that it was all consensual in terms of the way women were treated? Later, of course, it emerged that Vince McMahon had paid off a number of women millions of dollars to settle lawsuits. Did that surprise you, or was he the kind of character where actually that was not that surprising?
What I've always said is if you do not have a thick skin, you do not belong working in the WWE. I do find that to be the case in a lot of areas in television. I think as a woman, you must have thick skin. Were there many instances where I probably could have gone to HR over something small or even something that probably had a little bit more oomph to it? Yes. Was I the person to do that? No. Now, I'm not saying that I was, mistreated in any sort of way, but there were definitely things that went on at WWE that if an outsider were to get a glimpse on the inside, they would say, what is going on here? How are people working in these specific conditions? But it's just one of those things that you kind of went with. You were working with the WWE. I'm interviewing men who are wearing nothing but like tiny little Speedos on. So it's kind of like the job that you sign up for.
Okay, Marvin, you were sacked by Vince McMahon. He obviously had a ruthless streak, like many successful business people. What's your view of him?
Well, Vince, I echo everyone's sentiment so far. And just like Coachman said, he said no to Vince one time in 13 years. I never knew saying no was an option. When Vince said something, it was pretty much law. I got under his, I got on his bad side one time, and it was right before we were getting ready to go on an extended break. And an extended break for wrestlers might be an additional 2 or 3 days at home. But it was right before one of these breaks. I had an average match. Wasn't a stinker, wasn't a horrible match, but just wasn't great. And as soon as I came through the curtain, he was there. And he was there to let me know just how mad he was at me. And he told me, during your time off, you need to decide if this is the place you want to be. Now, there's that side of Vince, but there's also the side of Vince where after a 3-year battle with cancer, the night my mom passed, I didn't get a call from his secretary. I didn't get a call from his wife. I got a call from Vince telling me exactly how, just how sorry he was for my loss. So it's good and bad with the man.
What do you think the general view, Maven, is of this? I mean, when I watched the documentary series, depending who you're listening to, a lot of the bigger stars talk quite fondly of him, and yet we know there's been a slew of scandals around it. We know he's effectively been pushed off the scene for now anyway, no longer has the family ownership that he had, etc. Is it right that he's being depicted as a kind of villain now, or do you think that's been overplayed?
Well, I'll answer your first question, obviously, first. The stars who have a fond view of Vince is a very transactional individual.
Right.
If you're making him money, and a lot of these stars were making him millions, he loves you. And you talked about me getting let go by Vince, and I agree. When you see Vince backstage, he'll ignore you. If you mean nothing to him or nothing to his show, he'll pass you by and won't give you the time of day. But Vince made his bed. He's unfortunately now lying in it. I know that there's probably more to come, and like most people, I'm simply sitting back waiting for whatever is going to unearth itself.
Well, you guys obviously were all on the inside. I guess that the person who could be best described as Vince McMahon's nemesis was the New York Post journalist Phil Mushnick, who's been running a slew of exposés about bad practices at WWE. I want to give a little clip of an example of what I'm talking about.
I don't know why he has vendetta. They really didn't want to look. They didn't want to know. Against me, I don't know why. Because he's a dirtbag.
Vince is guilty of aiding and abetting the Ring Boy scandal. At best, he's guilty of rank neglect. This was the biggest guy in cable TV. Nobody wanted to look a little deeper. Why isn't these things page one? Millions of kids worship these guys, and they're dropping dead. Where's the news? And again, McMahon seemed to escape that.
Jonathan, what's your view of Mr. Mushnick and all his exposés?
Well, I think when you write for the New York Post, and I came in long after a lot of the things he was just talking about that in the documentary, but when you write for the New York Post and your entire job is to write negatively about somebody, he knew that writing negatively
hang on. I write for the New York Post, and that's not my directive. I'm a columnist.
No, wait.
I'm a columnist in your
Yeah.
post. No one tells me to be negative. I can write what I like. So I would take issue with
but
that.
in the 90s. Okay, well, I'll say back in the 90s when he's writing about that, he